Welcome back to the Built to Last show. I'm really excited for this episode with my good buddy, Kendall Lejeune. Welcome to the show.
So excited to be here. Finally, I get to be on this side of the microphone.
I know, right? So we did a little pod swap there. So I had a chance to be on your show, Kendall, and then I was like, gosh, I got to have you on our show as well because you have so much value to offer our listener today. So I'm excited to dive in and talk all things branding and your entrepreneurial career and community. I know that you've got such a wealth of experience and knowledge, and we're ready to pour into the people today.
So excited, so excited. I know that we share a very common background of both being teachers, and we have sort of some similar aspects of our journey. So super excited to chat today. This is gonna be fun.
Yeah. You were a music teacher, right?
I was, yeah, yeah,
Music. Yeah.
music.
Music. And I had the computer keyboard. I was a computer teacher with the computer keyboard. You
Got
had
it.
the other one.
So was it considered an elective at your
It
school?
was.
Yeah. So
Yes.
I do say like, I don't have the experience of having taught like a core subject where you have to teach everyone someone. I think for our subjects, people at least kind of wanted to be there, which was nice.
Yeah.
But it's interesting.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. Well, I want people to get to know who you are and who's the guy behind the business. So we're going to talk all the business things, but I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and kind of your come up as an entrepreneur because you've got a pretty diverse background.
Yeah, so I'll try my very best to keep it as as neat and tight as I possibly can because it does feel like it's been kind of everywhere. I first got my start as a music teacher, like you mentioned. I taught high school band. I knew from the age of like probably 11 that I wanted to teach music. Like that was my thing. And but I had also had a lot of modeling in terms of like entrepreneurship. So my grandfather was an entrepreneur. He owned his own business. He had several businesses. He owned real estate. And I just thought growing up like that's what you did like for work. I didn't like the concept of I have a boss and I have to go to a 9 to 5 or I have to ask for permission to take off. Like that was a very foreign concept to me. I didn't understand that until I got probably into middle school that not everyone was like that. So I had that model very, very early on, but I also had this desire. I knew that I wanted to teach. I like that was my absolute passion was teaching music. I loved that. And I did all the things that they told us to do, go to school and get the degrees and start your career and start teaching. And so I started teaching, absolutely loved it. Every single second of it, I loved it. And but I quickly realized that there was such a strong entrepreneurial bent to my personality that didn't quite fit the
Mm.
like just be a teacher and that's what you do kind of thing. So I never wanted to like leave teaching. I was always just looking to add that like how can I be more entrepreneurial? How can I do
Mm.
more things? So started teaching. Then I got into real estate. I was really interested. My grandfather had multiple rental properties, and so I thought that's what you were supposed to do as an entrepreneur. So I got into that, and I actually started my career wholesaling houses. And so I wholesaled for about 4 years, and while I was teaching, and
Mm.
probably around year three, I pretty much tripled my teacher salary. And other, colleagues started noticing, like, hey, what are you doing? Because I would, mention, hey, if you ever see like, a house that's like distressed that you don't, in your neighborhood, let me know. And they're finally like, what are you doing here? What's really going on? Are you flipping houses? And so I started explaining a little bit about what I did. And Megan, like, people just started coming to me like, hey, can you teach me how to do this? Can you teach me how to do that? And so I started just helping as many people as I could. And, there's the teacher in me. I was
Yes.
like, yeah, absolutely, let's do this. And so I had sort of like a little informal coaching thing. I would kind of help people here and there. And then I had to make a decision where it was like, okay, are we going to take the real estate business to the next level, or are we going to stay kind of what we're doing, keep this a side hustle? And I decided to move forward in the direction of the real estate investing side of things. And so what I did was I stopped teaching full time, but I continued to consult. So I would consult with other teachers, other music professionals, and I would judge competitive marching band competitions, and judge those types of things, design for marching band shows. And I actually still do that to this day. So I just picked out
Do
the,
you?
yeah, yeah. So I travel the country, and I judge competitive marching band shows, and I still consult. And so I kind of picked out the
So
best
cool.
stuff that I loved, and yeah, just stuck with that. And so fast forward, I know that was a kind of a long-winded answer, but fast forward, I got into my wholesale house business, transitioned into land, and I just started focusing primarily on land, started coaching people formally on how to do that. And so now I coach land. I have a land podcast called Only Land Fans, and that has a community. And yeah, so just kind of just saying yes to life and taking all the things that come along with it, you know.
Yeah. I love it. How many years were you a teacher in the public classroom?
Oh gosh. So probably about 12 years. So
Oh,
I
you did it a
started,
while then.
yeah, it was a while. So I actually, the cool thing about teaching band is that like you can teach right out of high school. Like you can teach as what they call like a technician in a program. So while you're in college getting your degree, that type of thing, you can still kind of be like an adjunct teacher in different programs. And so as soon as I could, I started teaching. So yeah, I actually taught probably about 12 years before
Wow.
I said, okay, I'm gonna just consult and design.
Yeah, that's so cool. I taught 5 years, and then I taught 5 years in the classroom, and then I was teaching for North Carolina Virtual Public Schools at the same time. And when I
Mhm.
left the classroom, I kept my North Carolina Virtual Public Schools job teaching online until I think I kept it for 2 or 3 more years. So 7, eight
I love
years
that.
I taught. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of hard to stop. Like, I think that if you're a teacher, you're gonna find something to teach, whether
Hmm.
it's, in a formal public classroom or something. I just think that if it's in you, if it's in your makeup, you're gonna teach. I mean, you're still teaching now,
Or
right? In a different
yeah. So are
capacity.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, this background, you have such a cool background. It's so many different facets and interests and skills that you've built and gifts that you have. The band production, the teaching, the PR, real estate investing, all of it. How have you combined all these like different diverse experiences? How have they really shaped your unique approach to branding and community building? Because I know that's a really big thing for you.
Yeah, yeah. What a fantastic question. So, I'll give you a little bit more context. So, for listeners that maybe are not super familiar with the band world, when I say that I judge marching band shows and I design marching band shows, the best way to kind of explain that to a non marching band person is this is essentially like Broadway, like musical theater on the football field. And so groups will have budgets of, six-figure budgets, 150,000, three
Wow.
hundred thousand dollars a year to put these productions on, and they compete nationally with it. And so I basically, when I design, I'm basically the producer for one of those types of productions. And so when I judge, I am actually judging the caption that I'm judging is called general effect. And so that's the quality of the construction of the show, like what makes people clap, and what's the mood that they're creating, and how effective are they at creating the mood and taking us through a journey, pacing and flow and all of those types of things. And so it's very, very design heavy. And so I've always had an eye for how do we create a moment? How do we create
Mm.
a feeling? How can we affect the audience in a specific way? And so, from a branding standpoint, I didn't realize this, but there's so many complementary skills to creating a successful brand because you're ultimately impacting the way that someone who interacts with your brand, who sees your brand, feels from an emotional standpoint. And a really successful brand can sort of guide that person through an emotional journey and basically craft their perception of this particular brand. And so when I first started my land show, the reason why I started the podcast was because I just wanted to like learn from other seven-figure land flippers, like who was doing this at the top of their craft. And so I started interviewing these people and I just decided, hey, you know what? I would love to share this information with people, so I'm going to create a podcast around it. And so I would interview every single week a seven-figure land flipper about the ins and outs of their businesses. And so um, I had to come up with a name. And so I was sitting there thinking, I was like, okay, well, what could I call this that sounds kind of interesting? Well, we want it to be very interesting. I want people to listen to it. But dirt and land is not very sexy. Like how do you make something that's not really interesting sound interesting? And so I had that stuck in my head, like, how can I make land sexy? How can I make land sexy? And then I was starting to think, okay, well, who is this for? This is for fans of all things land. And then something just clicked, and I thought of like the OnlyFans platform, and I was like, you know
Yeah.
what, we're just gonna create only land fans. And so created that, and that's how that brand came to be. But what I didn't realize that I was doing was I was first thinking, how do I want people to perceive the podcast, and how could I draw people in, which all has to do with the intentional branding behind it. And so that's how that came to be. And when I started creating the different visual elements, the voice of the brand, it was all again incredibly intentional in terms of, again, how do I want people to feel about the brand when they interact with us. And so it kind of goes back into that whole band production type thing of everything has to be touched by design. Every single element has to be touched by design. It has to be crafted, and it should feel intentional. I think some of the best brands out there, you think of brands like Nike and Apple and all these other things, all these brands that elicit a really strong connection with either an emotion or a feeling. I say the brand name, and you immediately have some
Mhm.
type of connotation with it, and it feels so effortless. And I think the way that they do that is because every single element, every design choice is intentional to make us feel a certain way. And so that's how I've kind of approached that. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have follow-up questions because for someone
Perfect.
like me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't really feel like I have an expertise in branding. I mean, people certainly are not hiring me because I'm doing anything with their brand. And, I think I probably speak for a lot of people where sometimes the idea of branding can be a little overwhelming. And so the first question that popped into my mind when you were describing your approach to it, especially with your podcast, the question that popped into my mind was, did you have like, before you pressed go on the podcast and things went live, did you already pre-think of all the brand elements ahead of time? Or did you have some things that you were certain and clear about? And then you launch the podcast. And then as you're moving forward and going, and not just with the podcast, with any of your brands and any of your companies, do you have it all figured out ahead of time, the brand? Or does the brand also take on a life of its own as you go?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Um, I first want to preface it with saying that you are totally not alone in that question of like, well, oh my gosh, well, even what is a brand? Because I think that that's
Right.
one of the first things that like people start asking is, well, what is brand? And they equate it with marketing, or
Marketing.
they say like, oh,
Yeah.
it's a logo or it's colors. And the truth is, the way that I look at it is a brand is your reputation, like as simple as can be. So if I were to say, we have many mutual friends. If I were to say someone like Pace Morby, you would immediately start thinking of several elements that make up Pace and what his image is in your head, right? Like his logo and the sub two community. I mean, all of the things. And so to me, branding is just making sure that everything that we position ourselves and put out to the public, everything that we present is intentional and touched by design. Now, to answer your question specifically, I did not have a fully fleshed out idea of what all of the different elements of the brand would be when I very first started the podcast. So we just release our 100th podcast episode today, which is also Pace's episode.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah, and the when I look at the journey of how that has grown, it definitely was not like it is today. So when I started with the soul of the show. I knew what I wanted it to be about. And so I feel like regardless of how much growth you go through from year 1 to year 10 or year 20, the soul remains the same. So different elements can change, different elements can evolve. Like we've seen popular brands evolve their logos and things like that. But the soul remains the same. So when I first pressed go, I just wanted it to be, a cool, in-depth, tactical podcast that someone could listen to and then go implement in their land business. And that has now grown to a Facebook group community that is now over 9,200 people. Um, it's grown to in-person meetups. It's grown to a school community. It's grown to a coaching program. And so it's organically grown. And I also want to say that I have not spent a dime on any type of advertising for this brand. This is like 100% organic. And so that's how I've approached growing this. So to answer your
Oh, I'm
question,
going to stop you right
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah,
Because now I'm going to make this all about like, I'm so interested now in like so many elements of this. Okay. What really causes a brand to grow like that? Because a lot of our listeners are going to be very attracted to you didn't go the route of paid ads. And
yeah.
even in my own company, I teach all things organic. So I think this is really important for us to like just sit on this for a little bit. Can you walk us through like the growth journey of, you have the podcast and then you have the community and then you have the face Facebook group and then you have the school community and they have the coaching? Because I think sometimes when we're thinking about all the things that we want to do, it can be really overwhelming. And I don't think you knew you were going to do all of those things at the outset. It evolved into that. But in terms of the growth of the community and the people coming along on the journey with you, to me, that's a brand that sticks. That's not just good marketing. That's not just, a great product. It's both of those, and it's also the soul of the brand. I love how you said that, the soul of the brand. That's what keeps the people coming on the journey with you as you're starting these other new ventures that are part of the brand. And to a lot of people, I think that's like eluding them. They want it and they want somebody to tell them how to do that. But I would love for you to just breathe some life into the branding element of what's keeping the community and the people growing and evolving with you as your company and brand grows and evolves over time.
Yeah, Megan, that's a fantastic question. So to start with the soul of the soul of the brand, I another way of looking at that is okay, well, what is the intention? What am I setting out to do here? And so again, coming back to that original, the whole reason why I wanted to start the podcast was to create information, like create information and put it out there because I was looking for I'm a very tactical person. Just show me how to do it, tell me how to do it, and
Mm,
I'll go and implement. So I was growing my land business at the same time that I was growing my podcast, right? So I was getting information from these investors, and then I was going and I was implementing, and then the questions on the show that I would ask the different investors was really coming from a legitimate, authentic place of I want to know because I want to be able to implement that. And I think that ultimately is the very core of the soul
mm,
of the brand is that I'm seeking information and then I want to share that information. And
Mhm.
so I first started by asking these questions and recording and putting it out there in a podcast. The way that the community grew, and by the way, I truly believe that if you have, I know that there's um, lots of different definitions and things like that that go around about certain words in our space. So
Mhm.
I have another podcast called Tribe Tracks where we discuss community and branding and things like that. You've been a guest on that show.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because every person that I talk to has somewhat of a different definition. My definition of community is anyone that is in your ecosystem. So if
Mhm.
you put out, let's say, a reel, right? And someone listens to that reel, even if they don't engage with it or share it or anything like that, I still consider those people part of my community. So it kind of goes back to like my band days, where if we're performing a show, anyone that is seeing that show in the stadium, that is part of my audience. And so I kind of use audience and community almost interchangeably in a way
Okay. Yeah.
because I want to make sure that what I'm creating, um, people feel like they're part of it. So,
Mm.
coming back to the podcast, I'm asking questions. It's the soul of the show in terms of I'm just asking and I want to get more information, get information out. Well, the next step, I did not think that I was going to start a community. I didn't think I was going to like a Facebook group. I didn't think I was going to start a school on like the coaching and none of it. I just wanted to put out a podcast. Well, people started asking like, "Hey, I have more questions. How can I get more information?" And I was just having constant conversations with people that were like messaging me, emails, things like that, direct messages. And I said, you know what? I think this would be such a good conversation to have like in the public square. Let me create a place for this. So I started a Facebook group. And then what I decided to do was instead of just hosting a podcast, I would allow an audience to come in and watch the podcast as a virtual meetup. So um, in the Facebook group, I would stream into, or I'd stream my podcast recording into the Facebook group as I was doing it live. So all
Nice.
of those podcasts have live audiences, virtual audiences. So everyone tunes in, and then at the end of the podcast, which is not aired on the official show, we have a Q&A period, so people can ask questions of the guest. And so that's really what I think started growing that Facebook group, was because people wanted to come
Mm.
in, they wanted to engage with the not only the other people in the community, but also with the uh, the guest. And
Guest.
so that really started pushing people into the Facebook group. And yeah, we can talk about all the different little things that I did to grow it without paying anything. But the way that I look at it is people are everyone, whether you're an introvert, an extrovert, we want to be part of
Mm.
something, right? Even if you don't want to participate in that thing, you still want to feel like you're part
Feel.
of something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's what I aim to create when I'm thinking about what is the next step for the brand. So the way that the virtual or the in-person meetups grew is because someone reached out from my community and was like, "Kendall, do you have any in-person meetups?" And I was thinking, "No, I don't." But I let me find a land meetup for you, and I'm local to Austin. So I started looking and there was nothing that I could find. So I was like, well, I guess we're creating a meetup now. And so that's how that started. And so it's just the different elements that have evolved for the brand is because the community has told me that they wanted something like that. And then I just
Mm.
create it.
I love that. I might have to steal your idea with streaming podcasts into the Facebook group because that's a fun idea too.
Yeah.
Like that just sounds so fun. And now I'm like, shoot, I wish I had thought of that 3 years ago after all
Well,
these interviews.
well, I can't take credit for it. I will say I've had incredible mentors that have modeled different things, and I'm always looking to, just what can I implement that's just cool and different and unique.
Yeah.
And
Because that's not common, Kendall. I've never heard of anybody doing that. until right
Ah,
now at
okay.
this moment. I've never
Wow.
heard of it. I've never seen anybody do it. I've never heard of anybody doing it. I've never been told of anybody that does it until you right now. And I'm like, that is so brilliant because it's different and it's unique. And I love I assume you're streaming in with Zoom and you said people get to ask questions. So are they just typing in the chat underneath in Facebook so that it's just, you see the questions typed out and then you answer them? That's so cool.
Yeah, and then so what we'll do is we'll hop on. It's a virtual meetup, so the first 5 minutes or so, people can introduce themselves. I've had people meet in my virtual meetups like in different states, and they partner on deals together. And so it's a really cool place for people to meet. And then they will type in questions as I'm doing the interview and I'm asking questions. I don't read those questions until the very end. And then,
Okay.
so then I'll read the questions and then I'll implement those and say, okay, now we're here for the Q&A period. Now it's time to ask for the audience's questions. And then people can also unmute themselves and like connect directly
So they're
with
actually
the
on
guest.
Zoom with you
Yes.
too,
Yes. They're
even
on.
during the podcast recording.
Correct.
You just keep them all on mute, but you can see them.
Yes. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay, even cooler.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it brings a different energy to the interview because
Yeah.
it's very cool. It's just a
Well,
really unique
you and
thing.
I talked offline a little bit about this, where like how you and I kind of function and we do really well when we're prompted by the audience and questions and interviews, because that's just how we work and how our brain is kind of wired. I can see why that really infuses you with energy. I love this idea.
Yeah, it's very cool. I love it. And the
Yeah.
other really neat thing is people like I'm going to get into a really fine point here about content, but people are always asking like how do you create more content or how do you create content that people want or how can you be more consistent with content? The best form of content that I have found as far as like being in Facebook or like being in a Facebook group or anything like that is streaming in these live interviews because
Mm.
I use like a content waterfall system basically, which is essentially I will have the virtual meetup and everyone comes in to watch that and they'll invite their friends like, hey, you need to be on this live call. They're interviewing so and so today, and so we'll do that interview and then I pull the recording of that interview and now that's my audio podcast, that's my video podcast, those are my reels, those are my captions, those are my blogs. So everything sort of comes from that essential uh, initial interview. And
Yeah.
so because I do these virtual meetups every single week, I've done these every week for 2 years now. Sometimes I'll do two in a week. So it's that is what keeps the consistency going. So if I'm just consistent with if everyone knows like, oh, every week we'll see a new guest, like who's going to be in and who do we get to ask questions to. Um, that's been really, really huge, really
And
huge.
it's always a guest. So are you ever doing it where you're just streaming yourself and it's a solo episode, or is it always a guest?
It's always a guest. It's always a guest. So I will say this too. Something else that I have implemented on the show is that I've created series inside the Only Land Fans podcast. So we have a masterclass series where I will bring a guest that's been really popular, or if they've had like lots of downloads, things like that. I will bring that guest back on and we'll do a deep dive, and that's more of a discussion format versus like just me firing interview questions at
Mhm.
them. And I am also launching another series inside that, which is more for beginners, like brand
Mhm.
new people, that will not be an interview format. It'll be me sharing. So those will be solos, and probably we'll do some virtual meetups around that as well. But I go live often, and that sort of creates a container for people to come in and ask questions and things like that.
Mhm.
But for the
Mhm.
most part, the soul of that podcast is I want to bring in the very best people that I can find and pick their brains, in
Yeah.
front of a live audience and let people do the same. And so that's been huge.
Yeah. That is brilliant. So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want to go back to this and maybe explore it a little bit more. I even like was typing it out as you were saying. I was like, ask Kendall this. So, you know how you were talking about you really see your whole entire audience, whether they're free or paid in a paid engagement with you or free, and they just like liked a reel or they like to post or they're hiding behind the scenes watching one of these live streams that you're streaming into your Facebook group, or maybe they're not even in your Facebook group. Maybe they're just friends with you on Facebook or they follow you on Instagram. But you said, it's part of it is making people feel like they are part of something. So, what is your approach to like what goes into someone who's just out there in the ethers and you're free? You don't even know who they are. Like, you don't even know that they exist. You don't even know who they are, but they somehow might know who you are. And they're just out there floating around at the free level. And then I also want you to talk about like compare and contrast that to the paid level, people paying to work with you. What does make someone feel like they're part of a community when they're you don't even know who they are?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So I do want to first preface this by saying the first year of my podcast and group and everything, I did not charge a dime for anything. I had nothing to sell. There was no offer. It was just like, hey, come and learn. And it was just a very value first kind of a thing. And so even though I have sort of evolved and created paid containers. It was just because people, it was not like, okay, how can I make money off of this? It
Mm,
was really just something that I needed to figure out how can I give people more of what they're asking for. So again, coming back to what we talked about earlier, the fact that this brand has really been guided by the audience. And so I
mm,
keep my thumb on the pulse of what people are asking and what do they need and what do they want. And then I do my very best to be able to give that in a way that is in alignment with the soul of the brand. And
mm,
so like the paid community stuff, like we've got a school community, we've got coaching, that came out of like people DMing me and saying like I want more access to you, or I want to be able to ask you more things directly, and I want to be able to hop on a call with you. Obviously, like you can't do that with every single person that asks, and so we have to create some kind of okay, well what's the firewall that we can create? I think that one of the best ways to do that is just by virtue of like a paid program, because I don't know about you, but when I first started like helping people, and I learned this early on in my real estate career, when I was helping those other teachers, remember I told you about that when I first
mhm.
started? Like I cannot tell you the number of people that I sat down with for hours and I'm teaching them all of this stuff and they do nothing with it. Like nothing. And that was super disheartening. And
Mm,
I had to figure out, okay, I want to help as many people as I can. So how do I do that? I'm going to put out as much podcast content as I can. I'm going to create as many videos as I can. But if people want more and I only have a finite amount of time, how can I give them more? Well, I can create a paid level, right? Where I can actually um, give more and then actually get the resources that way it can fund the growth of the brand, right? So
mhm.
that's how I kind of approach the free to paid. But coming back to your question about how do I um reach out to the audience, is that what the question
Like,
is?
what makes people feel like they are part of
Mm,
something,
yeah,
whether they're
okay.
paying for it? Because again, like I really love that you shared your definition of community because I also think there are a lot of different definitions, and you're right. Everybody who you ask is going to have a different definition of community, and a lot of coaches and experts and marketers, they're out talking about what a community is, what it's not, and some people say, well, your paid community is your community and your free community is, like your lead pool or whatever. And,
Mm,
so there's all kinds of things. So how, like what makes somebody I almost want you to go into like the psychology and the emotion of the human being, because I
yeah.
think sometimes we are, as business owners, we're thinking goals, decisions, action steps. strategies, tactics, and we're so cerebral about everything that you've got to also tap into the psychology and the emotions and the feelings of your audience, whether they're paying you or they're at the free level in your audience. So I'd love for you to share it from that angle as well. Like, what actually makes a human being feel like they're part of something? Even, I mean, and really talk about the free level. I'd actually like for you to talk about that,
Yeah,
because if someone doesn't feel like they're part of something, they're probably never going to ever buy from you.
absolutely. That's
Yeah.
1,000%, 1,000%. So to answer your question about how I approach community, first of all, I think it's really important to really grasp the fact that we're dealing with human beings. Like they're not just like, you know, they're not leads. They're not, people in your pipeline. They are human beings. And so at the very core, like what is a human being? Like what makes up a human being from a psychological standpoint? To me, at the very core, we all have certain psychological needs that are all the most common denominator for us. So, for example, I think that everyone wants to feel like they've been seen. Everyone wants to love something or be loved. Everyone has lost something. Everyone has feared something. And so I think that if you consider those very, very basic tenets, I think that it's much easier to create a space that people feel like they're part of something if you're speaking to those different psychological needs, right? And so the way that I look at it is, let's say, um, someone is looking into ways to make money. Well, why are they looking into ways to make money? They are afraid of something, they've lost something, there's a desire um, for something else. And so I think, there's so many different variations of that, of like a motivation for someone, and people can like really get into the granular data of all of that. But at the end of the day, to me, the common denominator is they're looking for something or they want
Mm.
something, right? And so the way that I kind of approach my life is that I have multiple different interests. We talked about that at the very beginning, and I love that. And I embrace all of that. And I know that the reason why I got into real estate was because I wanted to make money. And why did I want to make money? Because I wanted to help family, I wanted to feel safe and secure. And so, and I also love entrepreneurship. And so I
Mm.
wanted to, that's kind of what like sparked my journey. And so I honor that with everyone, like everyone that can even possibly come into my community or see my like as an audience member, sees any of my content. I want to talk to their just interest level of like being an entrepreneur or being a self-starter or having a
Mm.
fear, right? And so I feel like in order to make someone feel as if they're part of a community, speaking to those needs and desires and fears and just honoring that and like, hey, you're a person and we're having a human experience together. I think that that's what drives the messaging and the content and gets people to come in. Because listen, we have 9,200 people in our Facebook group.
Mm.
Those are not 9,200 people that just love, eat, breathe land, right?
Right.
Some of them are just people that are like, oh, that sounds interesting because I can make a few extra thousand in a year and that would really help my family. So I make sure that, we always hear like the riches are in the niches and like you have to niche down and really speak to the pain point. I think that that's true. I definitely think that's true, but I also think it's true that there's like thousands of reasons why people might want to belong to a space that you've created. And my thought is whenever you create a space, if you're intentional about the underlying how are people going to feel, what like I'm going to feel relieved that now I have an answer to maybe a financial problem, or like I see some hope that like, oh, I could create like an a financial stream for income stream for my family. Those types of things I'm very aware of, acutely
Mm,
aware of, and I really try to speak to that in the content that we create, the different opportunities that we create for the community. So, I mean, I can go into detail about like how we run the community, like the Facebook group and things like that, that gets people engaged and feels like they're being a part of something if you'd like, but I don't know if that answers your question.
no, it totally answers the question. Or do you actually like consciously think about the feelings that your audience is going to feel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I it always goes back to what is the experience that the audience is having. I'm always thinking about that. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky for some people because they're like, oh, well, you're manipulating people to feel a certain way. That's really not, I'm not aiming to get them to feel X. I just
Mm,
know that I am working to create an experience for them that they could have any one of those needs met, if that
right.
makes sense, right?
Yes.
And so um that's the I would probably say that's it in a nutshell is like what is the experience that they're going to have. So when I put out a piece of content or I sit down and decide, okay, I want to create something, what am I creating? What need is it fulfilling? And what are the possible experiences that people could have? Because you and I can look at the same video and have completely different
Mm,
reactions, right?
hmm.
Like I'm thinking of some of my favorite movies, and I have friends that like hate the same movie. And it's like, how could
Right.
you hate it? It's so good, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's because people just have different experiences because of the lens of life that their life experiences have shaped that. So
Right.
I'm acutely aware of the fact that when I'm putting out a piece of content, it may not be perceived in X way, but it could be perceived in XYZ way.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure that it's always in alignment with the soul of the brand and what we're trying to do and create, and that it's meeting a need. I
Right.
think that's the biggest
Love it.
piece is that it's meeting some kind of need.
I love that. Okay. As you were talking, you've talked about the soul of the brand quite a bit. And another question that is kind of circulating in my mind as you're talking about that is the soul of the brand Kendall? Like, is it
Mhm.
you and your gifts and your strengths and who you were created to be and your authenticity? Is that the soul of your brand? Or is it not? And the brand itself has a soul
Yeah,
that obviously you
that's so good.
impact, but which one is it?
That's so good. So to answer your question, it's both.
Hmm.
So I believe that everyone has a personal brand. We've talked about this in terms of like if I say someone's name, if I say Megan Huber to someone that knows Megan Huber, they will have a list of things that will go through their mind and that will elicit an emotion, and that is your personal brand,
Okay.
right? And so I think that everyone has a personal brand, everyone has a reputation. My Only Land Fans brand is part of my personal brand. It's under that umbrella. And my fingerprints and my identity and my experiences are on the Only Land Fans brand, but my soul is my own soul, and the soul of Only Land Fans is its own soul, right? Because I have multiple interests, right? I am an entrepreneur, and I like land, and I like music, and I like entertainment, and all of these things. I love leadership. That's my soul, and that's my unique makeup of the soul of my soul. But the brand Only Land Fans maybe doesn't have the desire for teaching music, right? It has
Right.
its own goal, it has its own identity, but
Mm,
my fingerprints are all over it. So what I mean by that is part of my personal brand is I feel my best expression in this world is to be as authentic as possible. And that authenticity also reads with Only Land Fans. Like that's just part of its makeup because I'm the creator of it, right?
yeah.
Um, Different content style is also like I also have another brand called Only Brand Fans because so many people were like, how did you do what you do with Only Land Fans? I was like, oh, let me teach you how to do that. Let me put together a little container, and that's Only Brand Fans. And so people that want to learn more about brand, like, will go to that. And so the soul of the Only Brand Fan show is much more like the voice I feel like is a little bit more, I would consider meta. What I mean by that is like it's very self-aware of like, yes, we're it's a pun on OnlyFans, and we're gonna dive into that and we're gonna lean into that. And so the voice of that brand is a little bit more edgy and biting and sarcastic and witty and funny and humorous than maybe the Only Land Fans brand is, because that show is for a very specific um it has a very specific goal of educating people and being nuts and bolts. And so that's how they're brothers for sure, but
Mhm.
they have their own souls. They have their own identities because they have like um unique gifts and unique direction and reasons for being, right? So just to kind of summarize and kind of put that all back together, yes, Only Land Fans is part of my personal brand, but it has its own identity.
Yeah.
But absolutely, my fingerprints are all over it. Right. So, like, my content that I put out with Only Land Fans, very music driven. It's always gonna like the music, the vibe, the feel of it is always gonna be really super dialed in because Kendall, my personal fingerprints and my soul loves that kind of thing. So of course that's going to be part of that brand's identity.
Yeah. I love that breakdown. That was really helpful how you
I hope
described
that
that.
makes sense. I felt like that was kind of all over the place, but I tried to wrap it up for you.
No, that was great. That was great. So if we have listeners who are interested in only land fans and or only brand fans, where do we find you? I know you have podcasts, you have Facebook groups, you're all over the place. So direct us where to go if we want to learn more and be part of your community.
Yeah, so if you're interested in the land stuff, you can go to onlylandfans.com. We are like everything is there. That's the whole world of Only Land Fans. The links to the podcast, the video podcast, all of the community stuff is all there, onlylandfans.com. If you're interested in the brand stuff, you can go to onlybrandfans.com. That's also where that brand lives. Also, what I do want to say is if you are interested just in seeing, like maybe you're not like, okay, land, not interested at all, but if you want to see how that brand is expressed, definitely go check out Only Land Fans. There's some really cool stuff just to see the how and to see sort of the packaging and different brand expressions. I use it as a case study a lot because I'm very proud of it, and it's just a really cool place that's been built by the community. And so I'm very proud of that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's a really good homework assignment. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Also, if you're
Awesome.
interested in like following my personal brand and saying like all of the things, like if any of the things I've talked about resonates, you can go to kendalllejeune.com and I've got links to all of that stuff there as well. So
So good. All these brands and places to go.
they're all there. They're all there.
All
So
there.
so many playgrounds.
Yeah. I love it so much, Kendall. Thank you so much. I mean, there's like so many spin-off episodes. So maybe I'm gonna have to have you back and stream you into my Facebook group, and you can be
Let's
my first
do
practice
it.
round to go do that.
Yes, let's do it. I'm in. You just let me know and I'm there.
Let's totally do it. Okay, so final thing. What would you look? All of our listeners are entrepreneurs here. So, what might be like your final words of wisdom or inspiration for people who are out there going for it?
My first word of inspiration would be just take action. I think it's so common that we see people afraid to make a mistake and like, oh well, you've mentioned a lot here today about how are people going to think and what are they going to think when they experience you. That's only our business to a certain degree, right? In the way that I look at it is be intentional about what you're putting out and in the way that you are doing the best that you can to express who you are, and how they perceive it is none of your business, right? So you can have a goal for what you want to create in terms of their of how they're going to experience and what they're going to feel, but whether or not they like it or they don't like it, that's where I draw the line. And I say, hey, if you love this, come on in. If you don't, not a problem. We're still friends. And so I see so many people afraid to express because they're afraid of what will people think. But
Mm,
I think it's important. I do think it's important to think about what will people think, but I draw the line at, are they going to like it or are they not going to like it? That's
right.
not a question that I ask, right? So
Mm,
take action and be intentional.
amazing. All right. Thank you so much, Kendall. This was awesome.
Thank you. This was so much fun. This was so much fun. I enjoyed hanging out with you and your community today.
Yeah. All right. Until next time, listener, remember to design a business and life that is built to last.